Welcome back, everybody, and happy new decade. I'm Dean Rosencrans with the Dallas Bankers Club and host and founder of the Dallas Bankers Club show. You know, I'm real excited about our show kicking off the new year. I have a friend of mine from Mary Kay who I wanted to stop in, and I've known Salil Bapat for how many years?
Three
or 4 years.
Yeah.
And he has such a wealth of knowledge and a fairly diverse background going back to Ukraine, and he's a Thunderbird grad, and he's had a very successful career. He's head of finance for Mary Kay for the European division.
Yep.
And so welcome to the show, Salil. I really appreciate you coming, and happy new decade.
Thank you, Dean. Happy New Decade to you too. And it's always a pleasure to see you. And thank you for inviting me on your show.
Awesome. Well, I tell you what, a lot of our viewers are other finance professionals, and you know a lot of folks in town, but tell us a little bit about Salil Bapat. And I want to make sure, because I pronounce it, I think the way.
Yeah.
But tell me if I'm pronouncing it right.
It's slightly different. It's Bapat. So the first
Bapat.
Bapat, yeah. So the first A is more pronounced than the second one.
Yeah.
But that's the common pronunciation that you did. That's what I usually hear. So that's perfectly fine. So going back to your question, a little bit more about myself. I have had an interesting background. You mentioned my time in Kiev, a little bit in Ukraine. I am from India originally, and grew up in India, and then actually went to school to study engineering in the former Soviet Union. And while I was there, the Soviet Union fell apart, and I went to Soviet Union and came out of Ukraine. So that was a bit of a change. Yes.
Well, so how do you get to the Soviet Union from an engineering perspective? Why there? Why not to the U.S.?
I know, I get that asked quite a lot, actually. When I was growing up in India, purely by chance, my school offered Russian language. Mm-hmm. And out of curiosity, I started learning Russian in my middle school, and I really liked it, and I continued studying Russian as part of my coursework. And after my 10th grade, I went to Moscow for a Russian language competition. It was called the Russian Language Olympiad, where there were high schoolers from around 75 countries in the world, including US. And I was fortunate enough to get a silver medal, which obviously didn't mean that I was number 2 in the world, but that meant that I had some good language skills, and I was able to do well in the exams there at the Olympiad. Wow. So after graduating from high school, I got into a very good engineering program in India, and I didn't know, but then I got a scholarship offer to study engineering in the Soviet Union. And this was back in '86. Gorbachev was in power. He was implementing perestroika and glasnost. So I thought it would be pretty interesting to go study engineering and see what's going on there. So that's how I ended up there in the Soviet Union.
I mean, is engineering education there any different than you would have received at any of the engineering schools here in the U.S.?
No, actually, the engineering there was quite similar to what you would have received. One would have received in the U.S. or back in India. India has very good engineering education, as you probably know. There are a lot of people who come here who have studied engineering and who do very well. The big difference, however, was that I was studying everything in Russian.
So you were immersed.
So I was immersed, and in hindsight, I don't know if I would do it all over again, because I went from English to Russian back to English. And it was quite a challenge, I would say, definitely.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, so you find yourself at Mary Kay now, having come from Yum Brands.
That's
prior.
Right. Yeah.
And was that probably the longest company that you were at prior to in your career, I suppose, was Yum Brands?
Yes.
And you've held a lot of positions there. So I want to really cover a lot of your experience. I mean, it seems like Yum Brands took you all over the world.
They literally did.
So where have you lived outside of the U.S.? I think you've been everywhere.
So actually, I have been very fortunate in my life. I have studied in 4 different countries in my life. I have lived in 7 different countries, and I have traveled and visited 70 different countries for business in my life. So I'm absolutely very fortunate and have a lot of people to thank for that. In terms of Yum Brands, I did start my career with Yum in Dallas, in the US business for Yum Brands at the Pizza Hut brand. And then because of my international background, it was natural for me to move to the international division at Yum. Though what I did not realize is how vast Yum's business was around the world.
Right.
And how they used to place people in different businesses from different countries. So I got offered a role to work in South Korea for a couple of years.
Really?
And
Wow.
that was quite interesting because prior to moving to South Korea, I had only been to South Korea once, a
Would
few
that be
months before
Seoul?
that. I was based in Seoul, yes.
Okay.
And I took my family there, which was quite a change for the family, to say the least. And we were there for, I was
But it
there
was
for.
probably pretty metropolitan, I
It
would
was.
think.
It was very metropolitan. It was a great place to live. We really have very good memories of Seoul. The only challenge was that it was not easy to get around without knowing Korean language.
Okay.
So that was a challenge. So we would go to grocery stores sometimes, and we would just have to point at things and ask like, what did we want to buy?
Right.
We didn't have the iPhones that
Right.
time to pull up
Google Translate.
Google Translate and show or
Well,
have them speak.
that reminds me of a funny story. So and if my wife were a viewer, I probably wouldn't say this story, but she doesn't watch my show, so I can say this story. So we're in Mexico, and we're on vacation, and we needed some mosquito spray because she was getting eaten alive by mosquitoes. And we go into the Walmart down there, and my wife doesn't speak Spanish, and she just assumed everybody speaks Spanish down there. So we go in there, and rather than her just asking for mosquito spray, she proceeded to, in a way, describe it through her motions. So she's like, zzz, zzz, and the security guard who she was trying to describe this by doing these, he goes, you want the mosquito spray? It's over there. Oh man, I tell you. And then we went to China, and I used Google Translate. It didn't use the words, but I could speak or type into it, and then I would just show the phone to them. And it wasn't an exact, but it certainly helps.
It definitely helps. Google Translate is amazing.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. So, South Korea, did you ever learn Korean?
I tried to, I should say. I tried to take Korean quite seriously. I can read Korean. I could read Korean at one point.
Really?
I learned the alphabets, how to read Korean. So it was funny that I could read the billboards or the signs for stores, but I could not understand many times what it said, or most of the times. But then I forgot as time went by. But it is a very difficult language.
Well, living there for 2 years?
Yeah, 2.5, yeah.
Tell me about what you were doing there with Yum Brands.
Yeah, so I was the CFO for the Pizza Hut business in Korea, and it was a fairly important part of Yum Brands business because it was about 500 units in South Korea, and Pizza Hut brand particularly, but majority of them, almost 80% of them were company owned.
Okay.
So that's why Yum had huge amount of capital invested in there, and that's why it was an important part of the business.
Right.
And then over time, now especially 98% of Yum brand stores are franchised.
Also, they flipped.
They flipped, yeah. They flipped those stores. They flipped a lot of other stores. So
Okay.
over time, they have gone to a much bigger franchise model and
Does
reduced.
that still exist today? Is that pretty much how they're operating globally? Is
Yes,
the
they-
franchise model?
They have shifted over time to a franchise model. So asset light, which is the trend in the industry now,
Okay.
to be asset
Is that
light.
because just the capital requirements? It's
It's
just very
cap-
intensive.
Yeah, it's capital requirements. It's also makes it easier for you to grow your brand because you get good franchisees around the world and
Sure.
have them grow the brand as opposed to trying to do everything
Yeah.
yourselves.
In those scenarios, in a global brand like that, where it's a franchise, is it, as an example, in South Korea, is it that the individual entrepreneur can buy a franchise, or is it pretty much gobbled up by a master franchisor and he controls or she controls all the franchises?
So it could be either or. So when when I was in Korea, that time we had more of a, as I mentioned, 80% of the stores were company owned, but of the 20%, many of them were owned and run by individual franchisees.
Okay.
And it was not uncommon for employees to become franchisees.
Okay.
So employees would
Incentivized
buy
to-
out a store
okay.
and become a franchisee. But typically, many companies prefer to have one larger franchisee, and in many cases, that could be the master franchisee who, in turn, then manages other
Right.
franchisees.
Right.
Because then again, you are not dedicating as many resources to run that business.
Well, so as the CFO for a brand like that in that particular region, tell us a little bit about what you were faced with in those scenarios. I mean, compared to a U.S. CFO, I'm assuming there were quite a big disparity and differences between country risk, currency issues.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, because we were importing quite a lot of products for our pizzas. The cheese was imported, some of the meat products were imported.
From the U.S. to there, or
No, actually from other countries. So we
Oh,
used
really?
to import cheese from New Zealand,
Okay.
and then some other meat products from other countries. So nothing from US at that time,
Okay.
but from other countries. But a lot of the contracts were denominated in US dollars. So we
Yeah.
had a big currency exposure, especially for our imports. We had a very active union there among the
Really?
store employees, yes.
So, if more for employee benefits, just what was the union predominantly set up for? Just to protect the.
Yeah, I mean, like many unions, they start with the thought that they will be
Collective bargaining kinda.
bargaining
Sure.
power and all that. But then over time, then at least the union that we had in our stores were not necessarily representing all the right interest, I would
Okay.
say, of the
employees.
employees. Yeah,
Okay.
sometimes because they got tied to another bigger union, and then they were taking directions from the bigger union, and it just
Right.
was different.
So CFO roles are significant roles within any company, but as an example of this global entity that you're a part of with Yum in South Korea, what were all the different groups that reported up to you? Did you handle marketing and IT and everything?
Yeah,
like that?
so I had responsibility for supply chain. I had responsibility for IT and finance, which includes planning and control.
Right.
Marketing was run separately.
Okay.
So I had the functions that I mentioned, but it was pretty important role because when I got there, we had a new head of the business, and the business was struggling.
Yum
So
was or
the Pizza Hut business, the
Oh,
Pizza Hut brand
okay.
was struggling. It had done really well historically for Yum in Korea, but then at that point it was struggling, and it kind of got out of hand because average pizza price was $25 at that time there,
Wow.
which is even wow for us.
Oh.
So definitely, and for South Korean consumers, it was a very
Sure.
expensive price
That
point.
was a
So-
luxury white tablecloth type of a dinner for them.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
So one of our major tasks was to reposition the brand and make it more affordable, which actually we were able to do very successfully, and that made the business take
So
off.
it was $25 because of inputs into how much it cost to make the pizza, or were there other inflationary aspects that came into play to drive it to $25?
It was a combination of various things. So inputs were expensive, real estate was expensive in Seoul. We also had some delcos which were not as expensive, but overall the cost structure was quite expensive.
Wow.
And it was not like margins were very high.
Right.
We had good margins, but
Volume wasn't there, I bet.
volume was not there. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
So then you left South Korea and went to where?
So after South Korea, we were there for a couple of years with my family. I was there a little longer because I got there before the school term started, and my family joined me when the school term started. After a couple of years, Yum actually came and made me an offer to move to Thailand
Okay.
as the CFO of that business, and that was in some ways even more interesting business because we had a even bigger business in Thailand, and it was both brands, KFC and Pizza Hut.
Okay.
And it was very successful KFC brand, actually one of the strongest brand in a country in the world was in Thailand.
Wow.
And Pizza Hut was struggling brand there. So,
Yeah.
and I was the CFO for both brands there. So it was
Yeah.
a very interesting opportunity.
Well, I would think when I was in China, Pizza Hut was, or no, it wasn't Pizza Hut. It was probably KFC was there, but it wasn't the type of KFC that I was used to
Absolutely, yeah.
in the U.S. And I think they had a McDonald's there too, and it wasn't the same either. And there's different flavors and of the chicken, and it's cooked differently. And so I would assume that you've had a lot of experience in just how to, if it's a word, ethnicize a brand to make it palatable for the local community, right?
It is. It is. So it's a very good combination of making sure that it's palatable, to use your words, to local community in terms of food habits, but also you don't want to lose the brand flavor, so to speak,
That's right.
or the brand image. So typically what Yum does, or at least used to do before, I don't know if it has changed, is 70% would be closer to global menu. 70% of the menu products would be closer to the global menu, and 30% would be more localized.
Local.
So you can
Yeah.
get both, combination of both.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Bangkok? Is that
Yeah,
where
we
you
were in Bangkok. Yeah.
Yeah. How long were you there?
We were there for 2 years too. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. It was amazing place. I love
Yeah.
Bangkok. Yeah.
Have you been back since? Have you been back to South Korea? Have you been back to?
I have been back to Bangkok. Haven't had a chance to go back to Korea yet.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Would you go
love
back?
to. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So Bangkok, South Korea. Where after that? Now I know your education based on Soviet Union, and did you live in Kiev?
Yes, I lived in
Was that with
Kiev.
Yum, or was that prior to kind of your career?
No,
start?
that was as a student, and I
Okay.
worked there for a little bit before coming
Yeah.
to the US. Yeah.
Yeah. So the last stop before you came back to the U.S. was where?
So
Thailand?
after Thailand, I came back to Florida
Okay.
again with Yum, and
How
that
long were you with Yum?
I was with Yum for 14 years.
14 years.
That's right. Yeah. And
Wow.
of those, 7 were spent overseas and 7 were spent in the US.
Okay.
So actually I should rephrase that, because I was 4 years literally based overseas in Asia, and 3 years after that I was based in Florida but working on Latin America.
Okay.
So I
Well,
included
makes
that as
sense.
part
I
of
mean, that's,
working overseas.
Miami, I would.
That's right. It was Fort Lauderdale, Miami area.
Sure.
And working on all of Latin America region. So it was another very interesting
Pizza
experience.
Hut and KFC.
KFC and Taco Bell.
And Taco Bell
That's
by
right,
this
yeah.
time.
Yeah, because Taco
Okay.
Bell has a pretty sizable footprint in Latin America.
Okay. So, starting out in South Korea, what was that budget size that you were managing there? Versus, I would think Latin America would be much bigger.
Yes. So in terms of revenues, our South Korean revenues were roughly $500 million. Thailand was much bigger, and then in Latin America, the system sales were close to $1.5 billion.
Okay. So in a scenario like that, where you're a CFO underneath a large corporate who has another CFO, how do those interactions work? So you have audited financials for the subsidiary that you're working with, or that particular region, or does it all consolidate under the larger corporate? How does all that work within the inner workings of a company like that?
Yeah, so at Yum, we used to report at that time through international division. So all of Yum business used to have all of international business used to report as international division, and Latin America's financials would get rolled up into international division
Okay.
at that time.
Yeah.
So we didn't have our own different audited statements. We used to have auditors come in and take a look at the books as
Right.
part of the audit, but not
Sure.
separate audited reports.
Got it. So from Florida to Dallas then,
Yeah.
right? With Yum.
Actually, at that time, not with Yum. I came back without Yum.
Okay.
I started my career in Dallas with Yum, but then we decided
back.
to come back.
Just to be in this
as
market. Yeah.
Just to come back to Dallas, because
Yeah.
as I mentioned, I grew up in India. Then I was in Ukraine for a while. Then I came to US. In US, after going to Thunderbird, I worked in Washington D.C. Then again from D.C. I ended up going to Moscow for working for another company.
Yeah.
Came back to Chicago. Then came back to Dallas. So I've lived in so many different places.
Did you always take your family with you everywhere?
Yes, my wife and we got married when I was living in Chicago, and then my wife joined me. We moved together to Dallas, and then since then we've been moving together.
And I think you had mentioned she's an occupational therapist. Has in every place that she has gone, has she worked as an occupational therapist?
She has. So actually, she has had a very interesting career herself too, because in places like Seoul or Thailand, there were very few, literally handful of English-speaking occupational therapists in those markets. So she was in great demand.
Yeah.
But at the same time, she didn't want to work full-time.
Right.
So she would just do whatever she could to help out the,
Sure.
the people and help
Yeah.
the society, but she was not working full-time.
Okay. Well, so my wife went to Thunderbird as well.
That's right. I remember that. Yeah.
So not a lot of Thunderbird people out. I mean, are they even around? I think they shut down Thunderbird, didn't they?
They actually, they became part of ASU now. So
Okay.
Thunderbird is still there. But it's part of ASU.
a graduate
Arizona.
program of Arizona State University.
right.
Then.
Mhm. Yeah.
Okay, I'll tell you that was the premier international school.
It
And I would
was.
think it still is. I would think
It is, and I think the challenge with Thunderbird, that's my hypothesis, is that in today's world, when everybody's trying to become international and everybody has an international program, Thunderbird was a very niche program, or
Right.
is still very niche program. It's only a graduate school for international business.
Yeah.
So about 1,500 students, only one campus, and we had some satellite campuses, but to sustain a big program like that
Right.
on a budget of 1,500 students is challenging.
Yeah.
And to
Well-
attract top talent to teach and
Well, the name
recruit.
itself, I think there was enough talent that had been deployed around the globe that the brand itself people wanted to go to, and that's one of the reasons why my wife went. And she ended up working for Sealand, which is a large ocean container company, and all her colleagues and friends that she graduated with are in very large global companies now with great positions. So I would recommend those students that
Absolutely.
are thinking about international trade that Thunderbird would be a school to think about. So I know you were at Corner Bakery for a while
yes.
as CFO there as
That's
well.
right. Yeah, that's
Okay.
what brought me back to Dallas
Okay.
from Florida. I took a job with Corner Bakery and we moved back to Dallas.
Yeah. And so from Corner Bakery to Mary Kay, basically.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I went back to Mary Kay to work again in international, which was interesting because now I'm working with Mary Kay as part of the Europe region, and
Right.
I'm head of finance, operations, and IT for Europe region.
So do you find that the experience that you had with basically all your vast experience has added to what you're doing at Mary Kay? It's a different business.
It is. It is a different business
model, really.
It is a different business model, but my experience has helped me a lot at Mary Kay, and it is a very interesting business model. I was not aware of how much of an impact Mary Kay has had on so many people's lives
Oh my
around the
God.
world. Around
Yes.
the world.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it is for the entrepreneur in developing countries that you don't there's not a lot of barriers to entry necessarily for Mary Kay. I don't know what it takes. Maybe we can talk a little bit about that for our viewers as to what is required to be a distributor. But it is a way to lift them out of poverty.
Absolutely, and you hit it right on the head that Mary Kay's mission is to enrich women's lives around the world, and the barrier to entry to join a business like Mary Kay is very low. All you really need is a lot of passion and a lot of determination more passion than determination actually, and then some initial money to start your business. But that's few $100s. That's not
Yeah.
much amount, and then that's
But
how
it could
people have gotten
be,
started.
depending on what country you're in, $100 could be a lot. But, there's a lot of micro lending that are in some of these countries that they could probably get seed money to fund a Mary Kay operation.
Yeah, and
Or do
there
you
can
all
be.
provide some?
We don't do any financing ourselves,
Uh-huh.
but typically the financing you need or the amount of money you need to get started is not exorbitant,
Sure.
even in the countries that we operate.
Sure.
And then you can get a payback quite fast if you're putting in the effort and the startup capital is not significant.
Yeah. Well, every country is a little different, I would think. I'm not into makeup or things like that, but I would think that each country has its own way of applying makeup and perfumes, et cetera. So are there different R&D components to Mary Kay for all these different regions of the world, or is it just a singular product and this is the product that we have and you need to make it fit within each country?
Yeah, actually, the products are similar across the world.
Okay.
They're not that different, but what happens is, depending on the market, some markets are more excited about color products, so more lipsticks or more color,
Okay.
versus some other markets are more into skincare versus perfume. So that can vary for Mary Kay, and that can
Is
be
it
different.
mostly skincare type products, or is there wellness products as well as part of the Mary Kay brand?
By wellness, you mean nutritional?
Vitamins, nutritional.
Yeah,
it seems like that seems to be more of the, from a nutrition and wellness, it seems like that's the thing that's going on today.
That
right?
I do keep hearing that quite a lot more. Absolutely. Mary Kay offers nutritional products in China and
really?
a couple other markets, but
Okay.
not in all markets yet.
Okay.
But that seems to be picking up more and more.
Sure.
So definitely,
I would
I
think
hear
that the
more
Asian
about that.
markets are a huge. Is it an emerging market, or is it already a robust market that you have already tapped into for Mary Kay for China, in some of the other emerging markets in Asia?
Mary Kay is actually very big internationally.
Okay.
So China is one of our important markets.
Mm-hmm.
So Russia is an important market. Many other emerging markets
Sure.
are very important markets for Mary Kay.
Is it similar to the Yum brands where they have master franchisors in China, or how does that work? Is it
So,
corporate, and you have your own corporate employees there, and very similar structure as to the U.S.?
Yeah, it's a very similar structure to what we have in the US for Mary
Okay.
Kay, which is that we have our independent beauty consultants,
Sure.
who really do
So
the
is it a
business.
pink? What's the pink car in China, though?
So every country has its own pink car. I don't know exactly what car is in China, but all over Europe we have different versions of a pink Mercedes or a pink BMW
Yeah.
or Audi or something along those lines.
Interesting. Years ago, when I was with Wells Fargo, I was with the Trade Bank, and it was a joint venture between HSBC and Wells Fargo, and they called it the Trade Bank. And Mary Kay was a customer of Wells Fargo. I'm assuming it still is. And the fleet manager, or the CFO at the time, made the introduction to the fleet manager to our group for the purpose of figuring out a way to lease vehicles for those that were recipients of
Sure,
the pink
yeah.
car or whatnot. And I know that there's the Cadillac here or whatever. I see these and have grown up seeing these pink cars. And I just assumed that was going to be the same in all the countries. Well, it's not the case in Brazil. They get a different type of car, right? They're different brands down there. Or I think most of them were in Brazil for what we were trying to accomplish. But I found it intriguing how Mary Kay provides, from an incentive perspective, it may have changed over the last several years, but if you hit certain goals, you qualify to get to drive one of these vehicles. I forget how it's compensated, or if they pay or whatever, but that's kind of a cool thing.
It
that
is.
has lasted as part of your brand for how many years?
It's been so Mary Kay has been around for more than 55 years.
Yeah.
And the car has become really synonymous with Mary Kay. So the pink Cadillac that you're referring to, in other countries we don't have a pink Cadillac because Cadillac may not be the most premier brand in those countries, or Cadillac could be too big in some of these countries to drive around.
Yeah.
Because the roads are not as wide and the traffic can be
Right.
crazier. But the car concept is there in every country that Mary Kay operates.
Yeah.
And there's another thing that really started when Mary Kay was herself, Mary Kay Ash was running the business, that she found it odd that a woman had to take her husband with her to buy a car. And she thought that if our independent beauty consultants could get to certain level and meet certain requirements, it would be so cool for them to have their own car
Yeah.
and drive around in their own car.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's what started that.
Well, I want to touch on Mary Kay from the standpoint of attracting new consumers. So 55-year-old cosmetic company, usually if you think about the consumer that has kind of grown up with Mary Kay, they're probably brand ambassadors and they're probably still using the product. But how do you attract, in a pretty competitive cosmetic market, the teenager, the tweener type, as well as the people that are these young ones that could be distributors? And the reason I ask that is my neighbor's daughter does Mary Kay. She's 18.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and she's jumped into this pretty heavily and has already had, events at her home, and I think she was working with maybe a mentor within the business. I don't know if you all match them up with these younger distributors with mentors or what, but they rented a corner bakery actually and had an event there. So I'm curious how the company approaches these new markets.
Yeah, so it is a very interesting avenue for Mary Kay to make sure that we are able to be relevant to the younger audience and make sure that our business model is attractive to the younger audience, to the younger Generation Z and millennials and
Yeah.
all that. Because today, unlike when Mary Kay Ash started her business, today the women in this business world have a lot more opportunities, not only professionally, but even if they want to work part-time, which is one of the big selling parts or big selling points of Mary Kay, is to be able to work part-time and
Right.
have flexible hours. There are other avenues where people can do that in the gig economy. So that puts additional pressure on making sure that we are able to provide a business model and an opportunity that still is
Right.
attractive.
That's right.
And then add on top of that the social media component, that everything is happening on the phone or in social
Yeah.
media. So you mentioned that your neighbor does parties, and that's how Mary Kay brand really took off.
Took off. Yeah.
By doing parties and by introducing products to others. But many times today's young people don't have either the inclination or time or desire to go
Or
to
a
somebody
network,
else's
I suppose.
or a network. That's
Yeah.
true too. Yeah, because
Yeah.
more people today have 500 friends on their
Yeah.
social media, but
Not real. Yeah, exactly.
not maybe too many real friends. So that's
Yeah.
that's a challenge that Mary Kay has, absolutely.
Well, I would think that's probably something that has been developed over the years with technology that Mary Kay's probably had to tap into in developing new technology for apps, how to help the distributors with, okay, well, all you have to do is download the app and just show it to your client and they can repetitively order. Is that?
Yes.
Yeah.
So we have a lot of new apps, and we
Yeah.
have evolved with the technology, and we are continually investing. We as company, as Mary Kay, is continually investing in technology to make sure that we are current and we are staying ahead of the curve
Yeah.
to be able to conduct our business on the phone, on the go, and be able to make sure that our independent beauty consultants are able to leverage
Sure,
the technology
sure.
we have.
So I know y'all have built a huge warehouse up in Louisville. is it Louisville or Flower Mound?
I believe it is Louisville.
Yeah.
It's right on the border of Louisville.
Is that your new headquarters, or are you still off of the toll road for your corporate headquarters?
Our global headquarters is still off the toll road.
Okay.
In Addison. But the facility that you're mentioning is actually a very big investment Mary Kay has made, which is our new manufacturing facility.
Okay.
And the global R&D facility. So that's where we manufacture our products.
You
and
actually manufacture the products.
Absolutely.
Oh.
And then they are shipped all over the world from there.
Okay. See, I thought that it was more of one of those have it brewed in China or one of the other markets and bring it in, or direct import. But the fact that you're actually a U.S. manufacturer, that's excellent.
Yes, we are absolutely a U.S. manufacturer. Actually, around the world, we sell products that are made in U.S. In some cases, we have some third-party manufacturers in Europe or Latin America, but the vast majority of our products are made in U.S. and sold all over the world. In fact, we don't sell products that are made in China outside of China.
Okay. So I wanted to touch on just your involvement in the community. I know you're of Indian descent, and the Indian community is pretty prevalent in Dallas. Can you maybe touch on some of the things that you do on your off time with your family and friends and the Indian community?
Absolutely. So yeah, as you mentioned, there's a sizable Indian community in Dallas and doing a lot of good things, and it's quite successful. There are a lot of professionals from Indian community who have done really well in their careers and have established new businesses. And I know you know a lot of people from the Indian community who you've worked with. I try to give back to the community as much as I can, whenever I can. One of the things I would do is I work with an organization called the Young Entrepreneur. It started there's a bigger organization called the Indus Entrepreneur, TIE, and the TYE, the Young Entrepreneur, is an offshoot of that, which is still part of TIE, but it's more to work with high schoolers.
Okay.
And to help them think about entrepreneurship, help them think about how to come up with business plans, how to write business plans. So if you want to think about Shark Tank for high schoolers, that's what it is.
Oh, really?
And the way it works is that
is that offered through the school district, or is it an offshoot of some other private not-for-profit?
It's offered on a voluntary basis.
Okay.
It's not offered through school, but it's usually a 10 to 12 week program offered during spring semester.
Oh.
And the first 5 weeks are spent on just educating the high schoolers who are participating in that program on what is business. So I lead a course on finance, what are income statements, balance sheet, funding, and all that.
Sure.
And then
Well, let me ask you a question. If you're teaching this to high schoolers, are they having a glazed look over their face, or are they they're getting something out of this?
Actually, it's interesting how smart the kids are these days.
Yeah.
So a lot of the kids know what a lot of the things we are talking about. But the goal is to have then, after the first 5 weeks or 6 weeks, have these kids form little teams of 4 or 5 and then develop a business plan. That actually, the way the tournament or this program ends is that they present these business plans to real life VCs and try to raise
Really?
funding out of that. Yeah.
So has anything come out of that?
So there have been some very interesting
Really?
proposals, and there have been some VCs who have said that they are interested in pursuing this further.
So then this is almost a high schooler incubator.
It is absolutely. That's a great way to phrase explain
that's a really good idea.
Yeah, and then actually what happens also is that these kind of programs are done around the world through this organization, TYE, and then the tournament winner in Dallas goes to an international competition where there are tournament winners from all over the US, some places in Europe and Asia.
Sure.
And then they compete on their ideas, and then there is one winner for the whole tournament.
Now, your son is in this. Or was in
He
this.
has participated once. Yeah.
What was his idea?
Actually, they had a very good idea. He was with some other kids. They had an idea of how do we reduce the plastic waste? So they had an idea of making a spoon and a fork that you don't throw away, but you can actually eat. So it's made out of
Really?
it's made out of a dough that you can consume, and that way you don't have
Wow.
to. That way you can reduce waste. Yeah.
That was actually a very good idea. Did that go anywhere?
It didn't go that far because some of the high schoolers who were in that team ended up going to UT and all that.
Sure.
But it was a really good idea, and they had actually themselves created a product that they were able to demonstrate, and it was very neat idea. It was a really neat
Wow.
idea.
Wow.
I would say it is still a neat idea because I have seen some other similar products come online now,
Yeah.
come online meaning in the market, and it's getting more popularity. I mean, given all the waste we are generating and given all the
Absolutely.
concerns we have with
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
reducing
Emissions,
emissions
everything.
and the plastic
Yeah.
usage,
Yeah.
this is a really good idea.
Well, we both have high schoolers that are going to be going to college here shortly. Mine's a senior, yours is a junior. I know we both share a college planner, but if that one student that actually watches this show, what's some advice that you would give to these kids nowadays that want to pursue a business degree but don't really know what that means, right? When I started banking, I didn't really think that I was going to be a banker, right? My degree from the University of Washington is a business administration degree with a marketing minor. I probably should have went with marketing as my full deal. But, I'm sure you see a lot of candidates come in for analyst work within Mary Kay or various positions. And I'm sure you've looked at resumes of these students. Do you find that, oh man, if he just had this type of education, he would have been a perfect candidate? So I guess my question is, give some advice to the high schooler that's going into business, i.e., if my daughter listens to this, she's been accepted to 5 so far business schools.
Congratulations.
Kelly School of Business, Miami of Ohio.
That's awesome.
Oregon, et cetera. And I try to give as much advice, but I'm dad, she doesn't listen to me. But she may listen to you. So.
I think we all have that challenge that my son may not listen to me, but will be very receptive to what you have to tell him. Well, the advice that, it's interesting how careers evolve. You mentioned that you studied something different, but you ended up in marketing. I studied engineering, then I did business. I studied business. I never thought I'll work in finance for such a long time, and now
Right.
I'm doing operations and IT on top of that. So things evolve. I think what matters in the long run is passion and just how you get along with people and how you're able to work with people. So I think we as parents get sometimes carried away that can our son or daughter go to this university or that university, which can matter a bit in the beginning of the career, but not in the long term. I
Right.
think we all have seen people who are very, very successful in their careers and have done
Right.
great things, coming from not necessarily the background that they started with, or coming from a different
Right.
background, but just passion led them to
Right.
a very different place. And that's what I would say that, I think your daughter, my son should really look at what they are good at, what they enjoy doing,
Right.
and then pursue that passion.
Yeah,
Doesn't mean that they should not go to college and
No,
drop
no,
out, but
yeah.
going to college, I think, still is a very good proposition.
Well, I'm
but
also
not get so
of
much
the
carried away
mindset
with
that it
what
doesn't
they
have
are
to be a
studying.
liberal arts or a business. It could be liberal arts.
It could be,
That's really a
absolutely.
pretty well-rounded degree that kind of brings a broader perspective to a certain degree, other than just a focus on credits and debits. right?
Absolutely. It can be liberal arts. It can be really anything. I mean, engineering can open a lot of doors for you. Liberal arts
definitely.
can open a lot of doors. Business degree by itself can do a lot of things.
right.
I mean, if you think about where the world is moving and finance, where finance roles are moving, I like to say that, in the past, finance people were more of a bean counters, and now a successful finance person has to be bean sprouter.
Right.
it cannot be that you're looking back. You have to be looking forward.
Right.
And you have to know a lot about data, lot about data analytics. You have to have that strategic vision.
Right.
And all that can come from really any education. It doesn't have to be business education. It can very well come from liberal
Right.
arts education.
Well, it's having one at A&M now and one in high school, and obviously you have a junior and have been exposed to other high schoolers. We touched upon a little bit of social media, right? And maybe they have 500 or 1,200 connections, but they don't really have any friends, right? I think, based on some of the candidates that I've seen that were younger, that they really had the ability they could crank out an Excel spreadsheet like that and do an analysis statement on cash flow or whatever like that. But they couldn't carry a conversation.
That's right, yeah.
And the combination, I think kids today really need to break out of their shell. I mean, I know there's some anxiety there to do that, but to expose yourself to as many groups as possible and just kind of get social interaction with others, because in the business community, this is social. You still may be the CFO and you may be that bean counter, but you still have to interact with your boss and your team, and sometimes they get too enclosed into their own world and would rather be on their phone than to have a conversation. So my advice really to kids is expand your horizons a little bit more.
Absolutely.
Get off your phone and actually do what you're thinking, right? I'm at that age now where I want to do so many things. I'm just going to execute on it, right? Because I don't have too many I don't have a lot more years to wait, right? So, well, listen, Salil, I know you've got to run, and I really appreciate your time and your friendship, and hopefully you'll come back to the show, and I wish you all the best in 2020. So
Thank you,
thanks.
Dean. It's been a pleasure, and wish you all the very best. You are a great friend, and anytime you want me back, I'm
Awesome.
happy to come back, and wish you all the very best.
Thank you.
And you're absolutely right about the kids. I mean, the more they can spend time in real world versus on their virtual world on their phones, they are better off.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right.
Completely agree.
Great.
Great
Thank
seeing
sir.
you.
All right.
Thank you.
Well, that's another episode of the Dallas Bankers Club, and I want to thank Salil Bapat from Mary Kay for being our guest. I'll see you at the next happy hour, and cheers.